All right, so we've already discussed two of the three elements of the rhetorical situation, two of the three primary elements of the rhetorical situation. We've discussed purpose and audience, and now I'm going to discuss the third and final, which is stance, and that's related to the author as a person. So the stance, when we're performing a rhetorical analysis and we're evaluating the rhetorical situation, we not only have to identify the purpose and the audience, we have to identify how does the author feel about this. So the question we ask is, what is the author's attitude towards the topic? And there's some examples of attitudes that the author could have. We don't just want to say they liked it or they didn't like it. We can be more precise than that. So some stances could be objective, right? If we're reading a news report, hopefully news is supposed to be objective. Now, a lot of times it's not. But a really well-written journalistic piece would be objective, and that doesn't mean that it gives an even amount of time to pros and cons of an issue. That means that it objectively looks at an issue and then writes from that objective point of view. Some other attitudes could be critical or curious, opinionated, passionate, or indifferent. Okay, and there's a lot of ways that that an author can have an attitude toward a topic. Okay, the author's stance can also be affected by the audience, and we're going to get to this at the end. But basically, what I'm explaining to you is called we talked about breaking down the rhetorical situation. Another term for that is the rhetorical triangle, and basically, all 3 points of the triangle can impact each other point in the triangle. And so, basically, the stance that an author chooses to take when delivering a message can change based on who the intended audience is. So once again, like a colleague delivering information to a peer, that's going to be more collegial. It's going to be like they're on equal footing when one person isn't in charge of the other person. Okay, but a student delivering information to a teacher could be like that student trying to prove himself or herself that he or she has the knowledge and ability that the teacher's looking for. It could be the opposite, teacher delivering information to students. Basically, who the audience is going to change the stance that you take on it. Okay, now the other thing to pay attention to is when we're identifying stance in a rhetorical analysis, we also need to pay a lot of attention to tone. Tone needs to be appropriate for the audience and the purpose. So once again, that stance is affected by the other 2 points of the triangle. What's my purpose? Who's my audience? How am I going to deliver that message? What stance am I going to portray? The tone must be appropriate. When we're analyzing things, our tone must also be appropriate. We must be confident and authoritative. So we need to, when we're writing a rhetorical analysis and we're breaking this down, we should eliminate qualifiers like, oh, he might have thought this, or she could have thought that, or I think that. Get rid of that stuff. Make statements with authority. Okay, and then also finally understand your audience. This is called code switching, and you all do it automatically without really even thinking about it. But the way that you all talk to each other, if it's a group of your friends gossiping together, you're going to speak to each other differently than if you're speaking to your boss at work or your teacher at school or your parents at home or your church leaders. You have a different code for each group of those people. So when we're performing a rhetorical analysis, we're putting ourselves in the author's shoes and we're figuring out if the author chose the appropriate tone for the intended audience and the intended purpose. And so that's how we evaluate or analyze stance in a rhetorical analysis. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like I said, we end up with what's called the rhetorical triangle, where we have our three points of that rhetorical triangle are the author, the purpose, and the audience. Okay, so the stance, the purpose, and the audience. And each one of those things affects the other two. Okay, so what my purpose is, if I'm the writer, can change who my intended audience is. Because like I said, if I'm trying to persuade voters to think the way that I do, I don't need to go and persuade people who already think like I do. And since I know that I'm going to be talking to people that don't think like I do or who are undecided, that's going to change how I approach them because I can't assume that they think certain things already. And the same thing, if I'm a teacher speaking to students, that's going to change my text based on if I'm a teacher speaking to other teachers, or if I'm applying for a job and I'm speaking to potential employers. Okay, so each point on the rhetorical triangle affects the other 2 points. And so ultimately, our 3 that we've talked about are purpose, audience, and stance. And stance is kind of a substitute for the author, like what position, how does the author feel towards that topic. And as always with all of these, you need to put yourself in the author's shoes and think like they were thinking, and then you can determine how effective he or she was. All right, that's the end of the rhetorical situation. Thank you.